Take it you'd like to know what happens next in our Scalvus excursion? Well, they're in the academy now, in the very heart of Makalish, the alchemist Makalish's home. Oh, and poor Calvaine, pierced by the infernal crocodilian hybrid. Shame. I would have liked to see if he ever discovered what happened to the Dampier No Loss, that bloodthirsty vampire. Timulo only knows. And so do I. But that's beside the point. Well, let's say we crack open this old lore. Get to reading part 3. What do you say? Great. Get comfortable then, friend. Relax. I bring you part 3 of the tale of Skaho Academy. Alright, where were we? Looks like, oh yes, the group skirted the tar black waters. They're getting eaten by the demon fish that lurked beneath. There was some learning and discovering that the temple was actually an old academy. And, oh yes, they entered the sewers. The elf Calvaine fell to the mutant hybrid beast. The dwarf mayor surveyed his surroundings once more. Rain fell in the creeper vine-bound exterior of the inner cloister of the academy and drained into a central well wherein dwelled a half-rotten giant crocodile. Suddenly, the dwarf lurched forward and into the well. He was only able to grasp the ledge at the last second. Looking up, he was met with Jin standing over him. His black, ash-colored face showed no emotion. And as he lifted his foot to stomp on the fingers of the dwarf, he was grasped by Doru and Olgur and slung backwards.
What are you doing, Jin? What has gotten into you?
The dwarf's legs dangled frantically, but the crocodile beneath him didn't move even an inch. Jin, looking puzzled, gazed about himself. I don't know. I must have lost my temper. And then the voice came to his ear again.
Now, throw him in. Wouldn't it be fun to see him fall?
Jin shook his head about, and the voice subsided. Olgur then bent over the well and hoisted the dwarf back to his feet. Jin is sorry, dwarf. I don't know what came through me. I feel more powerful, yet so less stable in every way.
Forgive him, dwarf.
Spoke Olgur.
He's a sorcerer. His powers erupt wildly sometimes. Or at least they have been lately.
Jin glanced down at his satchel and then back up at Olgur. The dwarf huffed and brushed himself off.
A sorcerer, huh? You belong here then. Amongst these rotten abominations. I'm keeping my distance from you for now.
Jin did not say a word in response.
Well, we only have each other. We have to work together in this dangerous place, or it will all be our perils,
said Olgur. The dwarf took some time, but eventually gave in with a nod.
Come now, brothers. Let us find this Makalish and try to knock some sense into her.
Doru led the way to the north end of the cloister to a door that was marked Student Polygenesis Room. He pushed it open, and each one of them let out an audible gasp except for Doru. He could feel only the deep beating of his heart as he gazed about the black and yellow cocoons that were hanging from the ceiling. Each one of them were dripping with the black ooze from a small sphincter at the base. Each hovered over a well of their own, likely a holding cell for whatever were to fall out of the throbbing incubators. This is where horrors are born, spoke Jin. Olgur caught sight of a key lying at the bottom of one of the wells and extended a thick vine from his fingers to snatch it up. As soon as it was in his possession, one of the cocoons spasmed and then opened up to allow a girthy fetal shape down into the well below. It moaned and cried as the party popped it shut. They moved around the left side of the circular cloister, careful to avoid the great pit in the center until they came to a door that said Potion Laboratory. They poked slowly and carefully into the dark room to find half a dozen potions suspended by twine from the ceiling.
She likes to hang things for some reason.
Let's make sure it won't be us next.
Added the dwarf. The party grabbed a potion labeled Tushasu Concoction and then continued out the back of the courtyard until they came across a water-rotten door labeled Makalish's personal study.
Here we are.
Said Doru, arming his second guitar.
We're dealing with a mad woman, comrades. Arm yourselves and prepare for the worst. And stay quiet.
Jin readied his hands, Old Gore withdrew a glaive, and the dwarf held firm with his billhook as the party carefully opened the door and began ascending the steps before them. They emerged with a tight grip on their weapons into the center of a dusty room where a desk and mirror stood beside a small, solitary window. A bed stood in the opposite end of the room.
Upon plundering, they came across a portfolio of incredibly detailed drawings of strange-looking creatures of all shapes and sizes. These are all of her creations. Jin pocketed one of the pictures that was particularly strange-looking. The group soon also found a journal that was hidden under the pillow.
They came to discover Makalish was having a love affair with someone by the name of Dusiov. She spoke very fondly of him, but also with a deep sense of melancholy.
It has been nearly 20 years, yet the terrible memories still cling to my body like they are infants. If I had but the knowledge of your affliction, I could have restored you, my dear Dusiov.
He was sick. They were sick in Tushasu as well.
Must be a disease going around.
Spoke Doru.
It's a mirror of voices.
Spoke the dwarf. The rest turned to look back at him. His grip was loosened on his billhook and he was staring at the ground.
It's common in Hobgoblin society. The lower bloodlines who are enslaved by the other Hobgoblins often have it, and they can pass it on to their foremen and so forth. I spent many years undergoing forced labor in a Hobgoblin megacity. I know. And it's deadly. Just lucky I never got it myself.
Doru and Old Gore continued to read on.
And so, I will never end my research, despite what the High Council demanded, until I can find the remedy for death's most noxious melody. I will find a way, Dusiov. I am all alone in this now, and I wish you could hear me.
They found another note that spoke of a most recent green-skinned captive being the key ingredient for the creation of something she referred to as a scabusit. They discovered that in order to get into its chamber, one would need to craft the potion themselves, drink it, and with the essence of the concoction flowing through them, place their hand on the hand reader on the understudy door.
I don't like the sound of this.
Spoke Old Gore.
Come on, let's go. We need to find the way to this understudy.
The group promptly left the study and continued circling around the courtyard until they reached the front gate. A small leaflet lay soaked on the ground.
Doru picked it up, and he, Jin, and Old Gore shrank into their skin when they read its contents.
If anyone reads this, my name is Gyorth from Red. She plans to take me to her personal lab. I'm the last ingredient she needs before her terriblest creation is complete. I've lost so much strength, and I don't have a lot longer.
She has Garth.
Exclaimed Old Gore.
He saved me from near death on board that ship. We cannot allow him to be so forsaken.
A newfound burning vigor hung in the previously easygoing druid.
Come, he has to be somewhere nearby.
They paced until they came to a door labeled East Wing. It was locked, but when Old Gore used the key he had found on it, it swung right open. He moved impetuously down a long, dark hallway, that of which shadows crawled all about in the flickering light of a wall-mounted torch.
Ulgur, you're going to get yourself into trouble,
warned Doru like a concerned father. Old Gore continued to march fearlessly down the corridor until he came to another door on his right. Without reading what was written on it, he pushed it open to behold a torchlit chamber filled with dozens of cages. Their contents were gnomes and hobgoblins and birds and large rodents, and at the very far end of the room was a green-skinned humanoid. Ulgor rushed over to him, almost stumbling into another oddly placed, well-sized hole in the ground. It was indeed him, Yarth the Orc, but he looked badly emaciated and tired.
Well, look who it is. My prince is here to rescue me.
He breathed heavily.
We are, my friend.
Spoke Ulgor.
We're breaking you out.
He wrinkled his brow as if suddenly in disbelief.
Their eyes were always watching in the halls of the East Wing. How did you manage to get past the Dosyov trolls?
Trolls?
Doru muttered. He swore he could feel a presence behind him, and as he whipped around, he came face to face with two looming yellow figures. They bore the calm demeanor of a young man, but their deceptive glances were shortly lived as the nearest one hurled its arm into Doru like a log, sending him backwards. He lay right on the edge of the hole in the middle of the room. Jin was standing next to it and shivering heavily. The next troll barreled through several cages in attempts to reach the dwarf, who kept it temporarily at bay by throwing more and more cages in its path. As it continued to chase the dwarf through the room, the other one now towered menacingly over Ulgor.
You won't harm my friend,
Whispered Doru, clenching his guitars and rising to his feet. Yet as he was preparing to lacerate the troll from behind, he suddenly felt himself shoved down the hole he was standing next to and splatter hard into the wet darkness beneath.
Jin, what are you doing?
Shouted Doru from beneath. He gripped his arm in pain as he looked up to see the smut-colored face of the fetchling staring down at him with snow-white eyes. I'm sorry.
What made me do it?
Ulgor grew a thick layer of bark all over his skin as the troll raised up its arms and brought it down upon him time after time, each strike peeling back a layer of bark which he attempted to regrow as quickly as possible before the next strike landed. The other troll continued to chase the dwarf through the room, battering away one cage after another and occasionally opening their contents, allowing the birds or varmints within to now run free and add to the chaos of the room. Finally, a cage was broken open that had several dwarves and humans inside. They grabbed whatever crude weapons they could find, an iron bar, rocks, a shiv, and stood their ground against the looming nightmare. Jin stood frozen in the middle of the chaos. Before him, Ulgor crouched in a fetal position, getting battered into the ground, and behind him was a cacophony of the dwarf and his new companions as they skirmished with their towering foe. Below him was his friend Doru, whom he had just pushed into the well. Doru gazed about his ever-dim surroundings until he discovered a staircase that led up. He let out a hefty breath, but just as he began moving towards it, a crocodile emerged from the darkness and took hold of his leg. Doru shouted as it proceeded to death roll, and he was forced to roll with it or else risk losing his foot. Jin continued to gaze down and all around as the sounds of havoc in every direction penetrated his ears with deafening dissonance. He suddenly began unconsciously muttering verses in a distant tongue. Closed his eyes and walked up right next to the nearest moving thing and placed his searing hands against it. The troll immolated in a pillar of fire and turned around to face Jin, who stood fearlessly gazing up at it. Burn, he said, and as the troll raised up its branch-like arm to plant him into the ground, Ulgor severed its leg from behind with his glaive. It toppled to the ground and writhed about silently in the fire. Ulgor and Jin backed up calmly from it, and it soon turned into smoking ruin. Meanwhile, the dwarf and his comrades backed the other troll into a corner, swinging at it occasionally to keep it suppressed. Ulgor rushed to their aid and shot forth a series of long, thin vines from his fingers that wrapped around the troll's neck and pulled it to the ground. The group of vengeful prisoners proceeded to hack and bludgeon it into the ground until it stopped moving. Ulgor let out a sigh of relief and scanned the room.
Where's Doru?
They all held their breath. His distress calls from beneath could no longer be heard.
Doru!
shouted Ulgur, and as he rushed over to the hole that his friend had fallen through, he was met only with the sight of death. A crocodile that had been utterly eviscerated.
Did someone call for me?
Came a voice, and Ulgur whipped to find his friend standing bloodied and limping in a doorway on the side of the room.
I found something in its belly.
He spoke, holding up a large, partially digested key.
Close call.
Uttered Maris as a shape rose up behind him. "Look out!" shouted one of the dwarf prisoners, who knocked Maris out of the way, only to receive a vicious blow to the head himself. A snapping sound could be heard as the recently freed prisoner fell limp and lifeless to the ground. The rest of the group proceeded to batter the troll back into the stone floor, and after it had stopped moving, Jin approached it and set it aflame with his hands. "Burn," he muttered once more. Doru hobbled over to his interplanar friend and yanked his shoulders to face him.
What made you push me, Jin?
Jin stared right back with unblinking eyes. "Lut." Doru hesitated.
What is Lut?
Jin, expressionlessly still, opened the flap on his satchel and removed the jade idol that they had found in the swamp. Doru gazed up at Jin with fury in his eyes. Jin still did not blink.
The energy that the god Lut brings me is like nothing from the divine or shadow that I have ever experienced.
The monk ripped it from Jin's hands and walked over to the hole where the crocodile lay diced.
Doru, be rid of it, and I will lose my ability to fully control my powers.
His voice raised louder than Ulgur and Doru had ever heard it. Doru chucked it into the hole where it rolled beside the dead corpse of the crocodile.
Then be rid of it.
Muttered Doru.
In possession of it, you have no control over your own impulsion.
Jin's jaw dropped as if he yearned to release the words that were trapped inside.
I'm afraid. I don't want to happen again what happened with the spiders. I almost ended Ulgur's life.
Doru breathed out and then removed his symbol-etched headband.
Well then, we're just going to have faith.
Doru, Ulgur, and Jin returned to Gyarth and released him from his cage with the key Doru had acquired from the crocodile's belly. "She's finished her most abominable creation. Let's caboose it,"
I believe we can handle it, Gyarth. We've gotten this far.
spoke Doru. "I'm not sure you're prepared, friend," he said in a wheezing breath. "The only way to get into her understudy is to make an elixir of its essence. I know how it's done. I think I remember all the steps."
You're not quite yourself, though, Gareth, my friend. Your strength is not what it was.
Added Ulgur with true concern in his voice. "Maybe so," replied Gyarth, his voice sounding still a little more deep than wheezy. "But it's not gone." The orc stood proudly to his feet. He lifted his head. "I'm coming with you." Doru gave two sharp nods with his head.
Very well. Stick close to us at all times, then. We've met death enough these past days. I don't care to see another, especially one so close, pass before my eyes.
Gyarth nodded. "I can do that." The prisoners were given food and told reluctantly to wait in the jail room until matters with Makalish Adrit were sorted out. They retrieved Gyarth's armor and halberd from a chest in the room. Gyarth suited up, and then they left the jail. They headed down the dark hall where the trolls had been lurking until they came to a circular platform. A door stood to the right of them that had written on it Makalish's elixir room. "In we go," uttered Gyarth. The party came to yet another room where vials hung from the ceiling.
More hanging things.
Spoke Maris.
Why not just set them in the cupboard?
We're dealing with a mad witch here who uses her mutant minions to abduct folk in order to experiment on them,
replied Doru.
I'm not perplexed anymore by any of her ways.
Gyarth investigated the room, still hobbling from his lack of nutrition. There was another door at the opposite end of the room from where they had entered that had an indentation of a handprint on it. In runic writing on the door it said, Private Polygenesis Room. The elixir room was hexagonally tiled. The tiles were made of some kind of glassy marble that shimmered in the torchlight, giving the illusion of treading over large, scaly hide. In the center of the room stood a raised piston with a small blue-lipped pot, and beside it were 3 troughs, each filled with a different liquid, one clear and shimmery, another with a slightly milky hue, and the last with a deep black that seemed to move on its own.
This is where she made most of them, including the Dusiop trolls. In this room and the one beyond,
exclaimed Gareth, pointing at the door to the private polygenesis room. Ulgor wrinkled his brow.
What do you mean, Dusiop trolls? Dusiop was the name...
The name of her mate, yes, said Giara. Once he fell to the Mirror of Voices, she did everything in her power to bring him back. She kept his body for a time in the cage room, drawing from it, but later moved it somewhere more private. The trolls were the closest she came to his resurrection, but she soon realized that recreating his flesh completely would be impossible.
Their visages did seem oddly human, and even compassionate at times,
spoke Ulgor.
Oh yeah. Before they start banging you to the ground.
Love can drive folk mad. She must have loved him very dearly,
uttered Doru.
It is clear,
continued Gareth as he carefully hand-selected various vials and began adding them into the bowl in the middle. Maris gathered closely around Gareth, examining everything that he was pouring into the pot.
So, she already came as close as possible. What's all this about?
He said, grasping the different vials from Gareth's clutches.
Essence of mule deer? Crocodile? Manatee? Manatee. How will creating elixirs of mutants bring back this Dusiop of hers?
Gareth lifted his head and simply said,
I don't know. She is mad.
A remedy for death's most noxious melody,
came Jin's voice like a ghostly whisper from the back of the room. They each stared at him for a moment, and then Kiara added the last ingredient.
And rabbit. And now for the bonding agent,
he said, looking suddenly worried. He filled a small vial with a clear liquid from a trough near the pot.
I hope I don't mess this up.
Kiara slowly turned his wrist over until the bonding agent penetrated the concoction. The substance turned a deep purple and then began rippling.
Oh,
shuddered Giara. Maris looked at him.
So what does that mean?
Get down,
he yelled, as the concoction popped and then exploded, sending purple fragments all over the room. Kiara slowly rose, examining everyone in the room.
Is everyone still alive?
None of them were hurt, but they had come dangerously close to it.
I thought I did it all right. Mule deer, rabbit, frog, basilisk, bear, what else is there?
Jin retrieved the picture of the scabucid from his satchel. He wrinkled his smut-colored brow. His white, milky eyes blinked alternatingly, like a machine computing thought.
and human,
he spoke. Doru examined the diagram.
Does look to be humanoid. Here, I offer my own essence.
Doru held out his arm and Gyarth approached his friend tentatively.
Worth a try.
Hopefully you don't kill us, monk, Gyarth said as Doru walked up to the pot with one of his own guitars placed to his arm.
So do I.
He gently opened up a cut on his arm and let the blood into the pot. The rest of the ingredients were re-added, and Gyarth once again filled a vial of the bonding agent and poured it into the pot.
Here we go.
The concoction began to sizzle, and each one of them held their breath. It then quickly sizzled out. They each breathed out.
Well, I guess we try it now,
spoke Maris. Olgur was the first to drink the concoction, and nothing seemed to happen to him. The rest followed and then approached the door at the other end of the room. The one that had written on it, Private Polygenesis Room.
Hold fast there, lads, breathed Gyarth. She's in there now. I can smell her.
Olgur closed his eyes and then opened them slowly.
It's time to meet this Makalish.
And so passes part 3, the tale of Skaho Academy.